Thank you, Megan. And I'm just also happy to add that just recently, as just a few weeks, I'm also Harvard University's Research Data Management Officer with the Office of Vice Provost for Research. Do we have a... So I think that just with the 1 hour or so of the conference, we've already talked about quite a bit about the importance of data, right? And why talk about data sharing in an AI conference? Because, that was some animation that it's not showing up, but that's okay. Because my animation was going to say access to data is critical for AI solutions, and the next one was going to be, well, if I think more about it, access to good quality reusable data is critical for AI, to building AI solutions, and then I was going to add responsible access to good quality reusable data is critical for AI solutions. So I'll talk about the responsible access and reusability from more from a technology's point of view. It will not cover everything that is needed to access data, as we already heard from, from John, from the previous speakers about everything that you need to consider into Google, what constitutes good quality data. But if we think about collecting, managing, and sharing data with reusability in mind, we can improve at least the way that data can be used by others, right? So some of us about 3 years ago got together and thought about what could be what could we provide as a guidance for making data more reusable, more easy to access, easy to find, easier to access, easier to interoperate, and easier to reuse. So we built these fair data principles. And here's a simplified version of that, just to have an idea of what we should be thinking about it to improve how we can reuse data. So first, we need to find them. We need to know that that data exists. So if the data are described and have some rich metadata, that it will allow the searches to work better. That's one way of making it more findable. We need to also be able to reference it when we find it, cite it, and for that we'll need a global unique identifier that will point to that to a data set, and we will be able to say this is the data that we used in this study, or that we want to reference for others to access. The same for accessibility. This global unique identifier needs to be useful for retrieving the data, and we need to retrieve that data with be able to do it with standard protocols, and when necessary, having the authentication authorization procedures to do so. Even the metadata, the description of the data set needs to be accessible, even when the actual data files might not be. But you need to be able to find that the data exists by having the data metadata open. And then interoperability is also a big part of it, and how we can achieve that by using some of the common standards, common formats, common ontologies that are used within our discipline and even across disciplines, so that we make it easier for those data sets to interoperate from one system to another. And of course, APIs, application programming interfaces, are part of it, but we need to have that information in some sort of standards or least commonly used formats and schemas. And again, to make it reusable, we need those data sets to be richly described and have the detailed provenance of where they're coming from, how they can be reused. And these have to also have very clear data use agreements so that we know how those data sets can be reused. And again, the insistence on domain-relevant community standards. So if you look at all these points in red, in a way, all these impact how we could build AI solutions just by having data that is better described and have better quality and are curated properly for reuse. This is in a paper in Nature Scientific Data that you can find more information on the FAIR data principles. So there is one other part of this that is the responsible data sharing. So for this, we, with Latanya Sweeney and Michael Barsinai, we worked on a set of very simple concept, but hopefully a powerful one that defines a set of levels for sharing data in a responsible way from a technology point of view, so that it has the right security requirements that have to apply based on the sensitivity of the data set, and it has the right access requirements based on that sensitivity. We talked already, and John pointed out, that de-identified data, for example, doesn't really exist, right? The risk of re-identification is high, even more as we increase the number of data available that we can merge with other data sets. So in some cases, even though we say that we want to make that data as public and as open as possible, we might still want it to make it in one of those labels, like, for example, the green so that users still register and we track who has used that data in case that there is re-identification. If there is more risk of re-identification, this would go into yellow, orange, red, and crimson. And actually, these levels were very much inspired by the security levels from Harvard, the 5 levels, but it added these access requirements. So just very briefly to say that technology can help, and for the last 10, 12 years at the Institute for Quantitative Social Science, we built a platform to share data that follows the FAIR principles, so it allows for templates for metadata to make the data, facilitate how we curate the data and how we make it more reusable and easier to access and find. And we are now integrating it with these data tax levels so that we also provide or guarantee this responsible access to the data sets. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Merce. That was great. So a question, do you envision that, for example, for the red tiers, that you could be even potentially sharing HIPAA type of information?
So the HIPAA identified data would be under red. That would mean that you would really not be able to just download the data into your own to an endpoint, right, into your local machine, but you would be able to work in a data enclave with that data. But it would be, I mean, the important part here is really the standardization, so that when we're talking about red, we're defining the same thing across the organizations and across groups, and we understand, we use that as a language to understand how we can access that data. But yes, it would still have to be HIPAA compliant and stored in a HIPAA compliant way. And it could facilitate the access by other groups by just following the right requirements.
Thank you. Very interesting. One of the conversations around data sharing and global health in general has been that data sharing oftentimes can exacerbate inequities and collaborations that might exist in global health. Yeah, and particularly publishing about a place without including colleagues from that place. And I just worry, as we talk about data sharing and AI, that might even be more extreme. So are there any guidelines or?
I mean, are you referring more about the concerns about, well, if you lose credit or that others can make use of your future discoveries in a way?
I think
that the data is valuable so for your own research?
One issue is credit, for sure. And
right.
then the other is how we build our broader collaborative teams, not just within our home institutions, but across locales, to be able to use the data in a way that is right. promoting the issues in the locale where the data was collected. Right. And right. I just don't know, in the data sharing guidelines, is there any language around how those types of issues?
I mean, it's a good... it's a very good point. I don't know specifically to the FAIR that it's part of the language in the FAIR principles, but what I do know, and I've been working on that for the last decade, is that credit, for example, is a big part of the Dataverse project of another projects that focus on data sharing, right? So by one of the incentives of making your data or the data from your lab or from your hospital or from your work well, accessible to others is that you now provide a citation, well, the repository generates a data citation so that others can reference the data set directly and not only the published paper, but the data set. This is obviously important also, like Leo talked about, the reproducibility crisis is important also for being able to reproduce the results if you add the code to the data. For the other part of the question, I mean, I think that actually building the platforms and standardizing the way that we do data sharing helps with that issue rather than making it harder, so it becomes easier to work with others and with other groups outside your local group. Thank you.